world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil. And with me, you know it, as always, the backwards hat wearing, folding chair straddling, trust fall initiating Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates. I've decided to reuse some of the best ones when we return to the Teen Study Bible Study, Dr. Chris.
Yeah. Trust fall was good. That was key to any youth group gathering.
A cohesive youth group.
Yes.
You must trust fall.
You had to.
And did you do any washing of feet with your youth groups?
No, I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't think. We might have.
Well,
Yeah.
as a good Pentecostal, I've washed many a foot.
Mm-hmm.
There was only one time in a youth group where we did a feet washing, kind of like the Teen Study Bible Study, and it was just complete chaos. You know, this was early teens washing feet. All spiritual weight or lesson that could have come from such an act was lost in the sort of nervous chaos that is a half a dozen early teens, preteens washing each other's feet.
At least give them warnings so they all could wear clean socks, because that was.
I did not do this. I was not the leader I was a victim.
You were
Yeah.
a participant. Oh.
And interestingly enough, this was not at a Pentecostal church. This was at a Calvary chapel. So,
Well, they have Pentecostal leanings. They're charismatic.
Yeah, they got some flavor in there. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, the only thing I remember as a youth pastor, of course, when I was in youth group, never did that. But as I was a youth pastor, we had a few events where, kids could take their shoes off for whatever given reason, or you'd have that one game where everybody takes a shoe off and throws it in a pile, and you got to do something. I don't remember how it goes, but I just remembered that it was usually a very smelly evening, because teenage boys and sometimes girls, the feet can smell really bad sometimes. So,
and you might be asking yourself, listener, why are we talking about this? Well, it's because this is the Teen Bible Study Teen Study Bible Study episode. It's our second one, and I think we've just naturally sort of fallen into this idea that we really need to set the stage, Chris.
Yeah, sure.
Because if you're really going to understand, even just on a sort of scholarly level, what it was like, much like when you're looking at the scriptures, and you got to remember to put everything into context, that it was written to somebody in a place, in a time that is not us. So to understand the scriptures better, it helps to understand the context in which it took place. And such is it with the Teen Study Bible Study. You must understand that teenagers are smelly and awkward, and oftentimes are forced to trust fall and catch one another. And it's within this cultural sphere that we are painting for you that one might come across the Teen Study Bible and the colorful insert within, which Chris is going to tell us about now.
Yeah. I think it is kind of, it's fun the way that you kind of brought up that hermeneutic process there, because
I'm learning.
as we, kind of just stumbled into doing this kind of series. We tried it out once. The last one that we did, I thought was really fun, and I thought, man, we pulled some good content out of it, and I'm hoping that can be the case moving forward. But it is kind of interesting to see. Yes, you go back. Oh Lord, how many years now? Is it 30 years basically that these Bibles were published, and kind of looking at the world 30 years ago, where everything was at, and then, where it's at today, and what are some of the kind of timeless truths that are in there. And that is the same task, for a Bible interpreter. Of course, you're going back, 2,000 or more years in those instances, and you are not referencing the writings of some person at a Zondervan publishing house somewhere, but you're referencing the eternal Word of God.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, yes, as you mentioned, the process is kind of similar, and there are some things, as we were kind of thumbing through there, and like, should we give this another try? Should this be a thing that we do? There was a really interesting insert in the teen study Bible that I thought there might be a fruitful conversation to be had there, and that is in regard to self-image.
The classic teen topic of self-image.
Yes.
Can you imagine teenagers 30 years ago so concerned with their self-image when Instagram and TikTok did not exist? They were not even a twinkle in Jeff Bezos's eye at the time, or whoever. The sort of colloquial tech oligarchs.
Who's the MySpace friend everybody had? Your first friend, Tom?
Tom.
Yeah, Tom.
Tom wasn't even a twinkle in Tom's eyes over there at MySpace. This is going off the rails. So there's an insert within the Teen Study Bible on self-image. Admittedly, a difficult topic for teens. Mm-hmm. I was a teen once, and what's interesting, and we'll get into it more, is the very concept of self-image that I have now, not like my own self-image or whatever, but the very idea of self-image has changed for me so dramatically, as I am now an old, wrinkled man, lying on my deathbed here at the age of 30-something. And looking back on this self-image sort of teaching material in the Teen Study Bible, ooh, man, was it a weird experience. Did you have a weird sort of out-of-body experience? Remembering just being a teen and being told pretty much constantly that, self-image is a thing that we worry about too much. And I remember thinking at the time, I think I worry about it the exact right amount, which is all the time, all day, forever. What was your experience?
Yeah, I don't know that I, thought too much about it. I always was, a little on the chubby side, I guess, is a nice way to put it. Never like anything, where anybody would be like, you're fat, unless of course they were trying to be mean, and then there was some content there, for them to pick at, but
unless they were the second chubbiest person in the room, in which case they probably naturally preyed upon you in order to take away attention from their own standings.
Yeah, but I can remember even as a little boy in like 4th or 5th grade, kind of going to the pool on little trips with the school or daycare or whatever, and being like, I have a belly, and just kind of feeling uncomfortable in my own skin. And I, that kind of really followed me all the way through high school. It wasn't really until I was out of high school that I kind of started paying attention to, what my caloric intake and what was appropriate and how
doing the math.
Doing
the math.
But
how to do it.
of course, there were at some point you notice girls, and then you're thinking to yourself like, oh, I should probably try to look presentable. And there's always the, fashion and all of those things, what the cool kids are wearing and that sort of stuff. So I suppose that, yeah, it was something that I thought about, but I've always had a certain amount of confidence just in my ability to relate to people, and I kind of always leaned on that as a strength, and tended to be the class clown, I think, in most of my classes, always inserting timely jokes, which I thought were hilarious.
Oh, that'll get you pretty far. That'll get you far.
And when when you can get the teacher to laugh, that was usually my goal. Yeah, that was usually my goal. Even if they usually hated it, because if you can get them to crack too, then the gig's up there. And
that means they lost and you won.
Right.
And that means you're the teacher now. If you can make the teacher laugh, then you, by the ancient laws of the classroom, you become the teacher.
Yeah.
Which they're very worried about giving up that authority. That's very interesting. Your experience with the self-image thing. I too had an almost debilitating obsession with. Well, okay, I'm putting this quite strongly. Let me roll that back a little bit. It was always on my mind. I look back at pictures now, and isn't this how life is, folks? I look back at pictures now of me as a young man, thinking, how in the world was I so self-conscious about my weight? I too was never comfortable in my skin, and I look at pictures now and I'm like, oh, I was suffering some sort of delusion. I was in some sort of strange delusion that, I just would look in the mirror, and what I thought was being presented had almost no basis in reality. And I think we'll get more into that as we continue. But yes, it was always very much about, okay, if we can just make people laugh here, then they won't notice all the negative things going on.
Yeah, it probably was some form of, defense mechanism. And I often wonder, people tell me, that I'm quite, there's not really a conversation, with anybody that I can't have, or that is too awkward, or I can't navigate or get through. And I'm not saying anything, I'm not trying to brag about myself or whatever, but it's just one of the...
I'll brag about it.
One of the, I guess... qualities that I have. Different people have different qualities. That's one of mine, and I think that probably just came from, it was some sort of defense mechanism. As a kid, I was insecure about a lot of things, and I made up for it in other areas. And I wonder how much, if I had felt really good about the way that I looked and had been in great physical shape, and
we'd be
thought
so
I was
boring.
a heartthrob, if I would still be the same person that I am today. So it is a fascinating conversation.
We'd be rich and successful and handsome, but we would not be podcasters. And you know what? That's a trade worth making, my friend.
That's for sure.
This day and age, you either get to be good-looking, rich, and successful, or you get to be a podcaster. You can't be both. So let's get into the Teen Study Bible Study material here, because I'm sure all of these things, this is just a nice foundation to feed the conversations that we are inevitably about to have.
Yes.
So if you did not listen to, perhaps this is your first episode of Ravel, in which case, welcome, and just hang in there. It gets better. But this is our second visit to the Teen Study Bible, published by Zondervan in 1993, and is just an exciting way to explore how we, as millennials, grew up in the church. What were we working with as our primary texts? And how does that compare to now? And as I said in the previous one, if you are a millennial who grew up in the church, you're going to be filled with nostalgia, and you'll probably go, oh my gosh, I remember that, a couple of times. If you are not a millennial who used the Teen Study Bible in the 90s, you are either younger, you're a Gen Z, in which case, I don't know. Just think of it as sort of like a fun retro thing. Uh, the kids love the 90s nowadays. Did you know this? Isn't that weird?
It has been, yes, coming back into vogue. I'm actually, I don't get to watch much TV, mostly because I try to watch things with my wife, and she falls asleep about 10 minutes into everything. So even when we try, I don't get to. But I have been just watching a show on Apple. It's called Shining Girls, I think. And it's about this kind of weird, I guess it's a serial killer or something. I'm only a couple episodes in, but it takes place in the 90s. And I was just thinking
yes.
Oh no, the 90s are now a time that is it's like a throwback.
I know. Well, like for us, we were obsessed with the 80s. We were like,
yes,
the 80s were so cool, man. It was kind of ironic and it felt like an ancient time that we could have no reference for. Things were so different back then. When in reality, like we were both born in the 80s, but we're just babies. And to consider that the 90s is now the 80s of this generation is disturbing. I've worked through it now, but it is disturbing to me.
What was the weird meme though? The math about it was like 2020 is as far away from 1990 as 1990 is away from 1960 or whatever.
75 or something. Yeah.
Something like that. And then or actually, no, maybe they did it the other way. It was a bigger gap because I think one of them had the 40s in it. And when you heard it that way, you were like, oh, dear Lord, how much time has passed. And 30 years is a tremendous amount of time, and so much has changed in 30 years.
For our puny human brains. Yeah.
Really a completely different world, especially for the teenager going back 30 years ago.
Well, now, listener, if you didn't know how time worked, I hope that this explained it a little bit to you. And this is just a taste of the sort of hard-hitting, sort of mystery-defining conversations that we have on the Teen Study Bible Study. Yes. Now, today we're doing self-image, which is admittedly something that is of big concern nowadays. In the 2020s, we have congressional hearings about how, social media giants are affecting the self-image of an entire generation. It's like self-image is of governmental concern in some cases. The concept is still with us, but I'd say that there's much more positive. I think there's much more positive resources nowadays. There's entire nonprofits and political campaigns and, television series is devoted to the idea of self-image and how we can sort of take control of our own self-image again, I guess, in a way. Because self-image does, I will speak from teenager Basil, because when I look back at the topic of self-image when I was a teen, it seemed like a beast, a monster that was completely out of our control, but living inside all of us, guiding our decisions for better or for worse. And I think to a degree, you can still think about it that way nowadays. Now that beast, that monster is fed more often. I think through the advent of social media and things like that, the ubiquitousness of the homogenized global culture into what is cool and what is not cool, moving ever quicker at a feverish pace that keeping up is almost impossible. But I think the concept is the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you agree?
I do. And there has been, I don't know, I'm kind of saving a little bit of it for however we get into the conversation. But I think that it has, there's nothing new under the sun in a certain sense. I think that you could take this conversation all the way back to ancient times, and there are some certain comments even back in the book of Genesis where it talks about, people feeling ashamed about, kind of their personal appearances, or people being envious of another person because of, how beautiful they are, those sorts of things. The Bible even talks about some of these things. Although it's not listed on this particular page here, they didn't get to some real good biblical content. But yes, it's been there forever, and it still is here today. I think that there are kind of some interesting facets to it, and I don't know how we'll get into it, but maybe we'll come back around where there's almost this kind of push in the other direction of, the body positivity sort of movement and that sort of thing, where it's like becoming a whole, whatever, a movement or this kind of organized philosophy from people that is kind of pushing back against some of the body shame and the difficulty with self-image that people have had. But of course, there's all different. I mean, people feel either insecure about their bodies for all different kinds of reasons. And even as you had said, looking back at some of the pictures and you're thinking to yourself, how did I ever, think poorly about my body or whatever, my self-image. We probably all have known a person, the girl or the guy or whatever, like, I'm so fat, and it's just laughable, So it's something that no matter where you're at can affect everybody, and it has for all time, and it still does today. But it is interesting to kind of see, at least in our lifetimes, which we can speak about with firsthand knowledge, how that's changed. So we'll probably get into that, as I think I'm looking at some of the stuff on this page.
We certainly will. And I think the very idea of, there's a whole academic category of philosophy of self. Like, what does the self even mean? I think I'm interested in sort of applying a little bit of that. Not that I'm some sort of expert. Perhaps we will get an expert in here to talk about it with us someday. But it's just, that's kind of what I mean by, like, nowadays I think about self-image, and I'm much less concerned about, what it looks like, but more like, what is it? Like, what is the self? It's much more of a sort of unmoored idea of what self-image could mean. And that's what I love about the Teen Study Bible Study, is that it grounds things back into the simple concepts that they used to be in our childhood. And with that, I think we should present the page, the self-image study page within the Teen Study Bible. Like the previous page, you've got some really exquisite early 90s graphic design with like some geometrical shapes and the sort of pastel colors, and for some reason one of the squares is reflecting the word image, but it is not reflecting the word self, which is causing some sort of existential crisis for me as I'm saying it out loud. Perhaps there is more deeply buried in this page. But up at the top, nice big block letters, sort of spacey looking letters, self-image. And we've got, are you ready for a dictionary definition?
I am, yes.
Self-image, noun, one's mental concept of oneself or one's position in relation to others, how one sees oneself.
Seems pretty straightforward.
Deep. Yeah, well, mental concept of oneself. Then, of course, it's for teens. So we've got the alternate definition, which some super cool youth pastor wrote to help us understand. The alternate definition is what you think about your looks when you wake up in the morning with a huge zit on the end of your nose. Wow.
Yes.
Relatable. Relatable. And beneath the title of, so let's talk about that. Do you think that is the definition and the alternate definition, are those adequate to begin our conversation?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what I'm really kind of eager to get to is that mirror picture that you were talking about.
Yes.
But I think that, yes, just as a straightforward sort of, definition, self-image is the image, that you have in your own mind about who you are, and that can be grounded in truth, or it can be grounded in lies. It can be, grounded in, and as we'll talk, hopefully in what God has to say about you, and who He's created you to be, and how He's designed you, or the enemy coming in, and whether that be through nasty teenagers, in the halls of the high school, or whatever, people on social media these days, or anything like that. You can hear all of these negative things about you, but some mixture of the truth and probably some sort of fiction and lie, those things coming together, they form your self-image, how you perceive yourself, which, as you were talking about in philosophy, it is very interesting which version of yourself is the real version.
Oh no!
Which one is the real one?
So in that graphic image that you were mentioning, where self-image is sitting on some sort of weird mirror on this page, and the word image is reflected, but the word self is not reflected. I think maybe speaking to the illusory nature of looking into a mirror. But there is text overlaid, and it goes like this: Who's right about you, Chris? Are you the way you see yourself? The way your friends see you? Your parents or teachers? Or is everybody wrong? If you're still growing up and maturing, does anybody know the true you, Chris?
Yeah. Well, that is an interesting, point for consideration. But I like the bit there. Are you the way that you see yourself, the way that your friends see you, or the way that your parents and your teachers see you? And it is an interesting conversation to have. Who are you really? I mean, and of course, everybody's quite familiar with the kind of, now it's become a pretty routine point of criticism for most people, that you have a life that you sort of project, to other people, and most of the time, it seems like anymore, you have a social media presence. You have a life that is presented to the world, that you get to clean up, and you get to polish, and you get to filter. Hopefully check all your spelling and grammar. Not that people seem to be doing that very much. I am part of the grammar police.
But that's also, but you're not wrong. That is a big part of, just sort of your image online.
Yeah.
Where there's so few ways that so few tools you have to present yourself besides pictures and text, basically, or videos. Yeah. Suddenly the way that you type goes a long way to creating the image of you that others see.
Yeah, it does. And for me, it's really more just like kind of a pet peeve. It just kind of irritates me when I see misspelled words, or punctuation out of place, or whatever. But anyway, it's sort of besides the point. But I guess it's not really. As you said, you brought it up as a point, so I'm not discounting that it is part of the point. It is. But the idea is, I guess, that I was getting at, who are you? Who are you actually really? We'll say that nobody is actually, what we see on their Facebook profile, or Twitter, or Instagram, or whatever other things. I guess you don't have much of a presence on. I don't use TikTok or whatever, but I guess people aren't. Regular people aren't on TikTok, right? It's just influencers or whatever. You don't do people have TikTok channels that just like.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own channel.
TikTok, Chris. Yes.
Yeah, but
yes,
I thought most
TikTok.
people just got on there to watch stuff. Like most people use YouTube and never contribute anything to it. I thought TikTok was kind of like that.
Yeah, it's just as the internet is. Most people are just there lurking, not posting.
Right.
Things.
Right.
Or at least nothing worth watching. But yeah, the usership on TikTok, I believe the last numbers were there's more people who use TikTok on a daily basis than use like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook combined.
That's insane.
Yeah.
But I guess kind of where I was going with that is we all probably know people, who have very, very polished, it social media pages and things like that. And, it it says something about you. And it might not say something about you that you are hoping that it says, that my life is, completely polished and super clean and awesome and
so
perfect.
Much free time to post on TikTok.
Right. Depending on who's, judging and who's, kind of doing the discerning there of what they're taking in. I mean, some people might look at it and say, oh my gosh, your life is so perfect. And then other people are looking at it. Yes. Like you said, how much time do you have? Or, how insecure are you actually? Or, any number of responses that people might have. But that kind of is the nature of the beast. You're putting yourself out there for either people's, praise or, well, I would, everybody's putting their stuff out there, I would think, for people's praise. Nobody's putting their stuff out there in order to be criticized. And that kind of feeds into the whole thing. So the question is, like, which one of these versions of yourself is the actual true version of yourself? Like, does it matter actually what other people think of you? Or does it not matter entirely and it only matters what you think of you? But then, of course, that brings in this deeply kind of theological thing where we are all kind of self-deceived, that our hearts continually lie to us, that we, tend to, whether you're thinking horrible things about yourself all the time, you're very critical of yourself, or whether you think that you walk on water along with Jesus, we all have these sorts of ideas about ourselves. So how much is that right? And then how much is what other people from an outside kind of perspective are perceiving about us? How much is that who is the true us?
And what I trip out on is at the end of this thing, it says here, if you're still growing up and maturing, does anybody know the true you? And I'm thinking, do I even know the true? Like, is it possible to fully know the true you? Because, of course, we're developing, the very idea of self-image, it alludes to a sort of illusory idea of oneself. Like, you could know yourself less than anybody else would know you, and you just wouldn't even know it. I'm sort of talking in some broad terms here, but I think that's one of the things looking back upon the teen Bible days is I don't even think I knew what was going on, like, with myself much. And you're sort of burdened with this idea, like, nobody gets me, nobody truly understands. And I was also a broody teenager, as most teenagers tend to be. You start thinking about these things, and I think back, I'm like, I had no idea what I was thinking about myself. And so how could and then I spiral into what is self in the first place. Mm-hmm. But I think it's actually an incredibly freeing idea that, like, even we possibly couldn't know ourselves, or the true us, and I guess that is kind of the point with self-image and the teachings that come from that is, it very much is an image, and we are often wrong about ourselves, and it takes someone else witnessing us to let us know that is the case.
Yeah, well, and I think that, if any parents out there or people who have been in any kind of, ministry settings, or even just people who have been good friends to people, and you have had people come to you and kind of try to have a little pity party or whatever, and kind of sulk and tell you, about how messed up they are or how bad they are or whatever, and you've had the opportunity to kind of look from an outside perspective at somebody else and just know, like, no, this stuff you're saying about yourself is not true. Maybe you've made a bad mistake here in this particular situation, but this does not define you. This is not who you are. And then that is kind of, from the outside, I can say that I have, spoken what I feel is a greater degree of truth into a person's life about who they are than what they were understanding about themselves at that particular moment. So it does really, make you wonder, like, how much of is the perception of myself actually accurate? And even as I grow, and I get older, and I'm an old man, as you said, laying down in bed waiting for death to take me any night here. But I still have moments where I feel like I present myself in a certain way, or how could anybody possibly see me as being anything except, and then you have people come to you and say things like, oh, did you know that you're whatever, you can be this way or this way, and it's like, huh, me? And then you have to take a step back and really think about, like, do some more self-examination. And oh my goodness, I have been blind to this thing the whole time. And then, it is an interesting point that they bring up at the end of this little section. As you're growing, does anybody know the true you? And then, of course, you can't help but consider the one body, the one person who does know us, wholly and entirely, and that, of course, is God. And I just, I can't help but think about Psalm 139 in that, and I just pulled it out to reference it here as when you were talking, it made me think about it there. But he says, you have searched me and you know me. And of course, God's knowledge of anything is total. It is perfect. It is complete. It is infinite. That His knowledge of all things, there is no limit to it, and there is no dark part of God's understanding anywhere. So when the psalmist comes out in verse 1 there and says that you know me, then we know that He knows us entirely. He actually does know the true us. You know when I sit, when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my laying down. You are familiar with all my ways. And then, it's a beautiful, most people are probably, it's one of the most popular psalms in the Bible. Most people are probably quite familiar with it. But the psalmist is going on to talk about how, God knows him intimately, and how God even crafted him. He shaped him. He stitched him together in his mother's womb, and that whole conversation. And it is something that I think when we're talking about self-image, and not just as a teenager in the 90s, but now as 30-somethings in, the 2020s, that if you want to have a true perception of yourself, then you need to, the only place to go is not to look into a mirror that only reflects half of what's actually there. Maybe that's why they left the self out of the mirrored image, Basil, because you're not getting the whole thing. But to actually take it to the Lord and ask Him. And this kind of is, one of the things that I tell people to do all the time is self-evaluation. There are so many places in our lives where I think that we are blind to many of the different kind of maybe detrimental qualities that we might exhibit, or some of the things that are going on in our lives that can be destructive in ways that we don't even, like, maybe just in small ways that we don't even perceive. And the only way that you're going to get any real revelation about this is if either somebody walks around and follows you like a hawk and has perfect discernment, but of course that person doesn't exist except God. So you take it to the Lord. That's the only way. You take it to God and you ask Him to search me and know me and see if there's any, deceitful way in me. And this is the thing that I have experienced in those moments, and I have spent seasons of my life, and still do it every now and then, but long, like extended periods of time, like for a year at a time, where every day I'm just asking God with like laser focus to look at me, look at who I am, and you tell me your perception of me. You tell me what you see, what I need to repent of, and what is possibly going on. And I can tell you that the Lord will convict your heart about sin. But He also, it says that Jesus says when He's sending the Holy Spirit, He's sending the Holy Spirit to convict the world of sin and righteousness. And this is one of the really wonderful things, that He does convict your heart of sin, but then He also shines a light on the righteousness in your life. That righteousness, of course, not of your own, as Paul says, something that is a gift from God, that's coming from God. But the thing is when you're asking God, like, who am I? The vast majority of the time that I'm asking God, like, what do you see when you look at me? Who am I? What do I need? There is this way that He looks at me, like His child, where He just sings praise over me, which feels completely undeserved. And I, suppose that it is. I suppose it is only out of His goodness and His grace that He would do such a thing. But He, when you come to Him, He is the one who actually gives you a fair and balanced sort of, was Fair and Balanced bad?
Don't think that I'm gonna let you pull out the Fox News slogan and let that slip on by.
I
Chris.
almost let it go. God is the Fox News of self-image.
Oh no.
It is. Oh man, I didn't even know that happened.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
But he does, and he is the person who can gently and tenderly say, here's the areas where you really could use some improvement. But guess what? Also, I love you so much, and of course, me now, being a new dad, I'm having all of those, all the things that people say about looking at this kid and just seeing him and like, I love you so much and you're so wonderful. And there's there's no way to even put into words how much I love you. And I just had a moment sitting in the chair the other day holding my little son and just looking at him. And I was just like, I wish there was a way that I could really communicate to him how much I loved him and that he would understand it. And then I was kind of like, it was like the Lord was like to me, saying the same thing. And he was like, you are just like a little infant, tiny little baby with no understanding of anything compared to how much I love you. And then I was just
That's
like,
how I think
ugh.
about you too, Dr. Chris. Just a tiny little baby who doesn't know anything.
So
Tiny little baby doctor.
I think somewhere in the middle of, what we think about ourselves, what people think about us, what the enemy tells about us, and all of those things, there's this weird mixture of truth. But if you want a real clear vision of it, jump straight to the Jesus answer and just ask God to tell you, like, who am I? What do you think about me? Who have you made me to be?
It's interesting because I got to admit to you, Dr. Chris, that when you brought up this topic, and of course, we're going to do the topic. It's in the Teen Study Bible. We're going to study it. There's a part of me that was not really like looking forward to like the biblical answer, I guess. Does that obviously sounds weird considering the nature and purpose of this podcast. But there are things, I think maybe because of my pure saturation within Christendom for my entire life, there are things such as when I think of the biblical answer to self-image, that I kind of just like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know that, what I'm supposed to think about this. I know what I'm supposed to feel about this. I know more or less what the Bible says about it. And it's just like any good Sunday school answer. The answer is Jesus. And I'm wondering, like, what is the nature? Because I know that there are, one thing I love about the Bible is that there's incredibly heart-wrenching relatable passages and stories, individual scriptures, whole chapters, whole books that so gut-wrenchingly accurate represent the depths of which the human soul can find itself here on earth. And one thing that I love about those, we could even keep it a little bit more basic, like Job. Job, I feel that the entire book of Job is pretty much Job questioning every possible inch of self in the context of everything going wrong in his life. And he's sort of on this roller coaster of self-image development. Luckily for him, he was sort of speaking directly to God, and God kind of goes up and down a little bit on this Job guy. Do you remember this? Like on one hand, God will be like, you're awesome. I made you. I would never do it bad. I did a good job. I'm a good craftsman, and I made you real good. And then the very next chapter will be like, you are but a mite on the grain of sand of nothingness compared to me, for I am God and you're just, you're nothing, basically. And I love that it is so complicated, because it feels like the good answer is, what she said. And I think that's correct. And if any youth group ever asks me to speak on self-image, I will transcribe what you said earlier and repeat that to those teens, and they will be changed for life because of it.
Yeah.
However, nowadays, I consider Job and the roller coaster of emotion that God brought him through in their conversations. And that feels a little bit more realistic to me.
Yeah. I think that Job is obviously a unique case, and I think the Lord was definitely trying to say something more about himself than he was Job. But yes, when Job first, addresses God's immediate response was, "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge?" And it's like, oh my gosh, it is so savage.
It feels good, though. I like it. I think I'm some sort of masochist or something, because to hear God speak to me like, who are you that you come to me, for some reason excites me very much. And I might need to employ some sort of psychoanalyst to help me understand why that feels so good to me.
Good thing we know one.
Yeah, I'm going to have to give him a call.
But I was thinking that, going back to Psalm 139, there is that verse, I think, that probably everybody knows, and you've seen it on all kinds of, baby welcome new baby cards and those sorts of things. But in Psalm 139 and verse 14, David says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." And I did a study on that some time ago, and I thought that one of the best sort of explications of that phrase, fearfully and wonderfully made, and I can't cite, I didn't get it pulled up because I didn't know I was going to be talking about this, who said it, but what he said was, basically, that could also be kind of interpreted as created in such a way so as to inspire awe. That, and basically, you have made me to be awe-inspiring. And it is one of those things, fearfully, you wonder about that, but a lot of the words that we actually use for awe and wonder, and, even to say that something is terrific, comes from, etymologically, the word terror, so something that is terrific is like, it's terribly awesome,
terrible.
Yes.
It's frightening.
Yes, a certain amount of fear, kind of like you were talking about with God, sort of understanding who he is and addressing us, that there is a certain amount of fear, the fear of the Lord, and this sort of terror. But that fear also manifests itself in this particular type of wonder, so that we are made in this terrific and wonderful way where, basically, if you think about something that is awe-inspiring, and whatever image that it takes or whatever sort of picture you need, of course for me now, and it probably will be for a long time, it's my little infant son, and I'm just amazed how much time in a day I can sit there just staring at him, and whatever he's doing is just awesome and wonderful, and I'm just looking at him, just looking around the room and figuring out how his fingers work and all of the different things, and just making the faces he's making, and when it looks like he's thinking about things, and it's just, you could just look at him all day, and it inspires awe in me. And then you stop and think, whatever sort of thing that you've ever seen that causes you to just kind of have your jaw drop a little bit with awe and wonder. And what David is saying is that God made each one of us in this way. And then I started thinking about that, and I'm like, well, I don't think very many people are looking at me and like thinking that I'm, very awe-inspiring. Not very many people are looking at me with like their jaws dropped, because there's just not, however wonderful anybody might try to ever say that I am, there's nothing that wonderful about me. But then you stop and think that the perspective is actually from God, that it's God that he's talking about. God is the one who is looking at us in awe and wonder, that if nobody else sees the fact that I am fearfully and wonderfully made, if nobody else sees the fact that I'm created in such a way so as to inspire awe, the awe that is being inspired is the awe of God, that he is looking at us like his little children and just sitting there captivated by us, completely in love with us, completely enraptured with us, and it's like he can't get enough of us. And if you don't believe that, all you have to do is look at the cross, and all you have to do is know that he cares and loves you so much that he was willing to do the greatest possible thing of all, which was to give his own life in order that you might be in relationship with him. So that, again, when we're talking about, yes, the Bible answer, that's just a little bit further of, kind of that Bible answer that really, he goes on, how precious are your thoughts to me, how vast the sum of them, like God is thinking about you all the time. And the things that he is thinking about you are not the same things as people are thinking about you. And the things that he is thinking about you, I encourage everybody to find some time in the next couple of days to truly just sit down and just tell God, I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to say anything. I just want to hear you tell me what you think about me. And I'd love to hear, send us an email and let us know what the Lord says.
Yeah, do you think anybody's going to answer back with the Lord thinks that I'm a tiny mite on a grain of sand and am a tiny, weak little baby who knows nothing?
I think, yes, I think that might be.
Okay, good.
That might be, yes, for sure.
Because that's kind of what turns me off about this practice, just a little bit, is that...
God's in the body positivity movement.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah.
You're perfect just the way you are. Never change. Never change.
I would be so suspicious. And I don't know what this is revealing about me. And I know that this is going to be fairly unpopular, or at least that is my hunch, probably because of the sort of ubiquitousness of the self-love thing, even within the Christian community. But I would be so turned off if, and maybe it's just me, maybe the Lord will give me what I need and tell me how tiny and useless I am. But it would be, I don't know if I would necessarily take it to heart if I stopped and asked the Lord what he thought of me and it was all good things. Mm-hmm. And if it was all the most positive articulations of what I could say about myself, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of makes that practice a little bit tricky for me.
I would say this, that I think that, yes, the Lord, he obviously knows exactly what each of his children needs to hear. And you, of course, hear parents of multiple children say this all the time. You can't raise... If you got 3 kids, you don't raise them all the same. They all have different needs. There's different ways that you can handle situations that arise, whatever. Everybody's different, and God knows how to deal with everybody individually. I think that one of the things that's interesting when you're talking about God telling us, whatever, maybe I'm a little insect or something, and he probably wouldn't say it quite like that, but whatever, you get the gist, is that I think the difficulty is that so many Christians are living in states of perhaps a slight amount of backsliddenness, or are living with these different weird perpetual sins or idols or things like that are going on. And I think that the voice of the Lord is continually speaking to us all the time, offering us conviction and correction. Yeah. And I think that people have gotten so used to tuning out the voice of the Lord because the things that he is telling you, you don't want to hear. So you don't want to hear, stop doing that, stop having that attitude, stop engaging in that behavior, this addiction, this whatever you need to turn away from. And you hear it all the time, and you just start to drown it out in the background. And then when you go to want to hear a word, you're like, I don't hear anything. And it's because you've become so used to tuning out the voice of God. That's one aspect, I think, of what you were talking about. But I think on the other is, when you think about the way that God talked to Job, you have to also consider Job's character. And the book starts off by saying that he was he was without blame. He was blameless before God, right? So he's a guy basically who can't be accused of any kind of sin, and that's the kind of person that God is talking to in the manner that he's talking to him in. Because Job is the kind of person who understands who God is, so God can just basically take off the kid gloves and say, well, basically what God is saying is, you think you know who I am, but you actually have no idea who I am, even though you might have the greatest conception of who God is of all the people on the face of the earth at that particular time. But he was able to speak to him because that's where Job was at in his life, this very righteous man. If there are people, I think, who are struggling with guilt and with shame, and the sinners and the tax collectors and all of the people that Jesus hung out with, I don't think that the primary thing that they need to hear is, you're a dirty, rotten sinner, because I think that they know that. And I think that the thing that keeps people away from going to God and asking him, what do you think about me, is they believe that they're going to be met with the same sorts of things that they're being told by the world, or they're being told by the enemy, the things that part of their self-image that's condemning them already. They feel like it's true about themselves, so if I go to God, he's just going to confirm this thing that I know to be true. And what I think is, no. If you are in that place and you are struggling with having any kind of, positive thoughts about yourself, go to the Lord and ask him. And I know that he has some, and I know that he's going to tell you exactly what you need. And there have been times, Basil, when the Lord has told me, basically, like you, what are you? Like, you are nothing. Who do you think that you are? Like, what do you think you're up to? And there are times that I really, really needed that. And he's able to do it in such a way that it doesn't feel like he's, smearing you into the ground, but he's revealing a truth about who you are. But then I always find that, like, followed up with this, like, but I still love you so much. I love you, you little vile, terrible, stinky insect. You're my favorite stinky insect.
Well, I think that's a great articulation also of why, of course, I'm just going to make it about me again here, why I appreciate this sort of savage treatment that Job received, because that there's almost a release. I think that's what it is. There's a release and a letting go that can happen as you're being told how tiny you are, knowing in the sort of fullness of the love of God that is good for you. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't like you. If you're secure in the unshakable foundation of love, then every word that comes from the Lord is done through that, and it's something about it. It just feels good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that certainly must be a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have people online who tell me, quite often, the types of things that I'm now claiming that I would love to hear from the Lord. And I will tell you, I've grown a thick skin over the years, but I don't necessarily feel the same foundation of love from the Twitter crowd, or the people who find it necessary for their own self-image to be the guy who emails the stranger man, podcaster man, to tell him just how bad of a job he's doing.
Yeah.
Now, if the Lord told me that, I might take it a little better.
Yeah. The thing I think that is really, though, interesting about the whole, conversation is, of course, C.S. Lewis has the quote about the true measure of knowing you're in the presence of God, and that is that you will either think of yourself as a small, dirty, worthless object, or you won't think of yourself at all. And, of course, he says it's better just not to think of yourself at all. And he says that's the measure of being, kind of in the presence of God. But I think, even as we were talking about Job, And even as you were talking about, being reminded by God of how small and perhaps even maybe insignificant or whatever you are, I think that all of those things they're in relation to God. So it's like when
yeah.
you're being compared with God, yes, I'm small. I am powerless. I am weak. I'm very unimpressive when I compare myself with God. But that is the thing, is it's like, is he saying something about me and my weakness and my, how futile my efforts are? Or is he really saying something about his greatness and how big he is? It's like the old quote too, where if the universe is here to, I think this was Piper, if the universe is here for us, then it seems far too big. But if the universe is here to be, a display of who God is, then he says, I think it might be just about the right size, which is, of course, as far as we know right now, infinite. So it's, kind of having that perspective, and even in our self-image, thinking about who we are, it's in relation to who God is. And anytime God comes into the picture, really, I would have to agree with C.S. Lewis. It's kind of like, it really doesn't matter. Andy Mineo has a song that he was on one of his, like his first, I think, studio album, and for King and Country on it is on the track also. And he says, I could sing of how much I love you, but it's better to sing about your love for me, because your love for me is so much greater. So he's saying, like, even in my worship, it's not like the part that's about me is the part that is like tethered directly to you, that you are the source of. So I think there might be, I don't know, there might be something there to kind of think on and consider.
Well, let's think on it and consider it as we continue exploring this page.
Yes.
In the thing. So there we go. It asks all the questions. Who's right about you? Are you the way you see yourself, the way friends see you, the way your parents or teachers, or is everybody wrong? If you're still growing up and maturing, does anybody know the true you? Mm-hmm. Which I just to bring it up real quick, they put it in the terms of growing and maturing. Of course, that's good context for a teen, but also all of us are sort of changing all the time, at least hopefully in certain ways. We're not staying too stagnant. So, whatever, this idea of self can be constantly changing. Now, It goes on with a little scripture here. You have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. That's Colossians 3:9-10. And it makes a little comment. The true you is the new you that you're becoming. Woo! That is always a comforting thought, though, that no matter what our image of self might be, we can just keep moving, baby. We're just going to keep doing our best, keep getting better. And if we don't like what we see in the mirror, we can do something about it. Mm-hmm. The sort of metaphorical mirror. So it is nice to have that scripture. Now, are you familiar with Colossians chapter 3?
I am familiar with Colossians chapter 3. However, because we are so limited on time, I want to use Colossians chapter 3. And I think that most commentators are going to agree anyway with where I would like to take the conversation here. But he says, you've taken off your old self. This actually kind of reminds me of, something else Pauline, which is in 2 Corinthians 5. And he talks about the fact that we don't regard people according to the flesh anymore. We don't regard them according to their old man, but now their new man, that person that's been born again in Christ. That's how we see people and understand people. So our perception of others, as Christians, that outsider kind of image should be through the lens of the gospel, through the lens of Christ, and that sort of idea. So the old self is gone, and again, you can. I think really 2 Corinthians 5 is a better place to go here. But I think the reason that they put this in here is because they say your new self is being renewed. Actually, Paul talks about this in 2 Corinthians. I think it's 4 too. He talks about though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we're being made new every single day. So it seems like we're or actually just getting old and wrinkly or whatever, but he says, but our inner man is being strengthened every day in the knowledge and in the image of its creator, which of course harkens back to, and most commentators that I have read on this, which is not a lot, but it's at least three. So all three of them say that he is hearkening back to Genesis 1:26 and 27, where he is talking about man being made in the image of God. So I don't know if you had something specifically to say about the Colossians passage.
No,
we could,
not really.
But
I just wanted to do a context check with you there.
Yeah. No,
Which you did.
contextually it's good, but it actually points us, I think, to the larger context, which starts all the way back in Genesis, and it brings up the, to use the fun, theological term, the Imago Dei. The image of God, and the fact that mankind, that each one of us, we were created in the image of God. And there's a really big discussion to be had there. So I don't want to hang out in Colossians too long.
Sure.
But have you thought much about the image of God?
I can move on. I mean,
I've
I've done all sorts of thinking about the image of God. I'm curious. Why don't you take it away, and we'll see where we go here.
Yeah. So interestingly, when we just did the artist on conversation, we were talking about art and people creating art and kind of art as self-expression, and really all art is the expression of self. You are projecting something somewhere inside of you onto a canvas or into music or interior design, as we saw, or any other kinds of things. There is this reflection of who you are as you're creating. And of course, we understand that God, being the master creator, that was part of his creative process too, that everything he was creating was an expression of himself. And then there is this very unique way in which he made humanity, because the biblical text tells us that God created everything by the word of his mouth, right? That he spoke everything into existence. But when it comes to talking about the creation of man, he used his words to create everything else. But when it came to man, it says that he formed him, with his hands from the dust of the earth, from the clay. He shaped him with his hands, and then he gave him breath. He breathed life into him. So there was this very kind of intimate part of the creation when he made mankind, that he set mankind apart, not just in what would be their function and their role in the earth, which we'll get to in a minute, but also just in the way that he shaped them. Like there was this extra bit of care that he gave to mankind, and not that I don't think God could give any more or less care about anything, but at least he did it in such a way so that it communicates to every single one of us, I made you differently than I made everything else. And then that it says in Genesis, have it pulled up here somewhere to read, in Genesis 1:26, then God said, let us make man in our image. We can talk about that. It's a long conversation. It's kind of pertinent. After our likeness, to rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over the livestock, and over the earth itself, and every creature that crawls upon it. So God created man in his own image. And then he's going to reiterate it again. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every creature that crawls upon the earth. So there is this, very interesting discussion of what it means to be made in the image of God. And we're talking about self-image, and it's like, well, self-image, true self-image has to contain the knowledge that whatever my image is, it's somehow a reflection or a projection of God, and we know that because the Bible tells us. So then we start to wonder and ask, well, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? Like, what exactly does that look like? And of course, people have taken stabs at it all over the place. Jump in here anytime.
Well, I think a good place to start would be, does God have 2 arms, 2 legs, 10 fingers, 10 toes? I mean, when we talk about image, there's so many different ways to think about it.
Yeah.
I think that's a very simple place to start, and just one that I'm curious what your theological training has to offer.
Yeah.
When you talk about the image of God, are we literally talking about the form, like a physical form of God, or is there's something else there?
Yeah. So you, of course, also, this is a great question that kind of brings us back to Colossians, but in Colossians, I think it's 1:16. It's somewhere right there at the beginning of Colossians, but it says, "He," that being Jesus, "is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation," right? So you have, while we say, yes, God, and of course, you have to think of God Trinitarianly, and most of the time we're saying God, we mean God the Father, even though Jesus, just as much God as the Father, and the Holy Spirit, just as much God as the Father. But when we say God, yes, we're talking about God the Father, and it tells us, he's invisible. So he doesn't actually have a body or a head or arms. And, when it says that he upholds us by his righteous right hand, obviously in anthropomorphism, he doesn't have actual hands, but he's using terms that we can kind of understand and relate to. So yes, God, the Father, does not have a body, but Jesus, being the image of the Father and the firstborn over all creation, and not to mention also you get into Revelation like 16, and it talks about Jesus, the Lamb who was slain before the foundation of the earth. So there is this conception, in the mind of God. Obviously his knowledge and wisdom is infinite. And then you have to ask yourself, did Jesus come after the likeness of men, in that being God said, well, this was how I made men, so this is how I'm going to make Jesus? Or was Jesus actually the prototype for Adam, and I tend to think that Jesus, being the firstborn over all creation, that when God spoke matter into existence, and then of course in John's gospel, and in 1 John, he's going to talk about the fact that all things that were made, were made by, that it was actually Jesus who was doing the creating. And I tend to think that there is sort of a ethereal sort of consistency or whatever of who God the Father is, and then there's a very physical sort of tangible expression of who Jesus is, and that physical expression of Jesus was the one that made the physical earth. So I think my personal take on it is that yes, our bodies were fashioned after the image of Jesus, who is the image of the invisible God. But most people are going to say that that's not really what the Imago Dei is, that it really doesn't have anything to do with how we look physically, but it is quite an interesting point of consideration. And I think that for all of eternity, Jesus is going to have a human body, that there is something eternal about who God is that we look at and we say, wow, you look just like me. You have a head and you have a mouth and you have eyes, and fingers and all of those different things. So that's my stab at it.
Yeah, well, it does bring up I think it sort of naturally brings up the question of what exactly is self. We're talking about what is the image here, and there is a physical form, and of course, as a teen, that is mostly what you are concerned with.
Yep. Yours and everyone else's.
There is the self that is the non-physical, and this has been sort of a topic of philosophical exploration for a very long time. And I don't know if really anybody's been able to nail it down that good. But I think the difficulty in nailing down exactly what the self is does reflect the level of mystery that would result in sort of God creating something in his image. Again, not just the physical part, but even the concept of self is as difficult to describe in sort of a non-colloquial way, can be as difficult to describe as, God the Father might be. You use the word ethereal or ethereal, depending on which Lord of the Rings pronunciation you want to work with. Because, you just do a little Google search, philosophy of self, which is sort of the broad term for the thinking about what self is. And you've got a ton of different versions of it. You've got self as an activity. And this is sort of the classical Greek definition of self, or at least working definition. You've got Aristotle, following Plato, defined the psyche as the core essence of a living being, and while claiming that it did not exist apart from the body, he considered its so-called intellect to be immortal and perpetual, in contrast to its organism-dependent vegetative, nutritive, and perceptual functions. In his theory of causes and of act and potency, Aristotle emphasizes beings in relation to their actual manifestation, and in turn the soul was also defined by its actual effects. For instance, if a knife had a soul, the act of cutting would be that soul, because cutting is a part of the essence of what it is to be a knife. So, this idea of self being what you do, like the acts, the acts that you take, the actions that you take rather, are reflective of what is on the inside, which has its own sort of problems because, I don't know. I think that there's actually a sort of reference there to how Paul thought of himself, or was it Paul? Was it Peter? Who was it? Was it Paul who did things that he didn't want to do and didn't do the things that he wanted to do?
Yes, Paul.
So there's this this separation between doing and at least an idealized like self. He had this idealized self that he wanted to be, but the things that he did not reflect that. Do you think there's anything there?
Yeah, it reminds me of the great theologian Forrest Gump. Stupid is as stupid does.
Sure,
is one expression of it. But yes, there is a great discussion to be had there about how much is what a person does, how much does that actually reflect who they are, and this actually comes. You find a conversation about it in Trinitarian theology, and I think we've talked about it here on the show before. But it is that aspect of Trinitarian theology known as God's immanence in his economy, and that is to try and differentiate who God is in his Trinitarian form in and of himself apart from creation, and that is his immanence. So who God is just as God before creation, God having existed eternally, and we know that creation is finite. So before creation, who was God? What was he doing? Who is he in and of himself apart from all of us? And then we know, of course, that a large part of who God is his creative work that we've been talking about for the last, while here now. His creative work, what he does, and that is the economy of God. So what God actually does. And then scholars have been, since somebody kind of coined these terms and realized there was a distinction between the two, there's a question as to whether or not there's a distinction between the two. Is there actually a difference between who God is and what God does? Can God do anything that is apart from actually who he is? And I tend to, while some people will say, yes, there is a distinction and God is something, apart from all of us, apart from this creation, he is something. I would say that yes, he is, but I would say that naturally his creation has to be a true and complete expression of himself, so that the two are actually one and the same. So when you're talking about, a person's actions kind of defining them, then I would say yes, yes, they do. To get back to the kind of disparity that Paul sees in his own life, where he says, there's these things I don't want to be doing, but I am doing. That is a result of sin, and that is a result of the fracture that entered into the relationship between God and humanity at the fall, where we have been separated from God in our sin. Now, when we come to faith in Christ, we are reunited with him, yet we are still living in the consequences, in these ripple effects of our sin. So we're being torn because we have this human nature that has been given over to sin, yet we are being, as we, even heard from a couple different passages, inwardly made alive. Outwardly, we're being pulled into death and into sin all the time, but inwardly we're being made alive. So in this human sort of existence, there is a great conflict between who I am and what I'm doing. The truth of the matter that will be resolved at the end of time, when we all meet God, is that we will be brought into that state. When we see him, we will be like him, where there will be no conflict anymore between who I am and what I'm doing. Who I am and what I do will be in perfect union as I come into perfect fellowship with God, and my nature will reflect his perfectly, and there will be no disparity between the two of those. But for right now, we're living in a fallen world where we are having to walk through this tension of, man, I feel like I'm being torn apart on the inside all the time. Because you are being torn apart on the inside all the time, because you have two natures fighting against each other. So, I don't know. Did I comment in the appropriate direction there?
You commented. That's true. You did comment in the appropriate direction.
Good.
No, that's what we're all about here. This is working out. Yeah, I mean, it's just so much more difficult not being a teen, dealing with self-image, man.
Yeah.
If only I could simply worry about the shape of my body again, and not all all these other things.
But hold that, because I want to come back to we're talking about the teen, and almost like all of this stuff is being it's almost over dramatic. I don't know if that's what you were getting to, but I think that people tend to think that oh my gosh, you're worried about all of these things that are really so inconsequential. But when you think about it, it is actually a symptom of the thing that is very, very true. And while they might not, in your teenage years, you might not be getting to the very core of it, the way that it's manifesting in your life is still coming from a place that is very true, even though you don't quite understand it. And one of the most brilliant things that I ever heard a preacher say was, he was talking about in your teenage years and those kind of first relationships that you have, maybe, and then your girlfriend of 2 weeks breaks up with you or something, and then not talking from personal experience, and then you're just heartbroken and so depressed or whatever, and then he said, and all of these adults will get around and they just kind of scoff at it and they say, oh, it was just puppy love. But he said, but it feels real to the puppy though, doesn't it? And I just thought to myself, wow, that is what a great take on that sort of thing. What a heart of compassion and all of that. But the fact of the matter is, it is real. What they're experiencing is real, even though we might look and say, oh, it's not going to matter in so long. It's still tethered to something that is infinitely and eternally true.
That is true. And you're right. I mean, I was also about to sort of backtrack a little bit on the perhaps belittling of the teenage experience when it comes to self-image, because of course there are incredibly thoughtful and introspective teens who not only deal with the self-image physically, but also, with the real core of self-image being the non-physical aspects of oneself. I wish I was, more confident. I wish I was more assertive. I wish I was
a little bit taller.
Wish I was a little bit taller. Wish I was a baller. Wish that I had a bigger vocabulary, or that I was better socially, or whatever. So, that's not quite fair to for me to simply, level the physical aspect of it on teens, because come to think of it, yeah, there was, you think of what one could describe as the first discovery of selfness in the Bible, which was the fall. I mean, there's some academic, conversation about the fall that it really, when we were united with God in the garden, we're united in purpose and in deed and in whatever, that almost was such a close union between man and God that man would almost not be able to differentiate between the fact that there are two different beings interacting with one another there. Does that make sense? I mean, it gets a little bit dangerously close to some heresies that have been taught.
My first thought as you were saying that, I was like, danger, where is this going?
No, this is totally a danger zone, because there are teachings in, I would say, broader heretical sort of schools of thought, but I don't think that this particular example, I'm not laying down any orthodoxy here, I'm just saying there's an interesting example where the fall, the separation from the sort of as in union as a physical human could possibly be, so were Adam and Eve for a while.
Yeah.
And when, after disobedience and the fall is when shame was felt for the first time. And the shame came from seeing their bodies. Sort of almost like realizing.
It's really good.
Almost like for the first time in history did a human being realize what they were, what they are, especially apart from God in particular. So you go from sort of what the psychoanalysts and the heretics would call sort of oceanic oneness, a union. Again, I'm not saying in any sort of funky way. I'm just saying as unified with God as a physical human being could be, so were Adam and Eve. And then after the fall, suddenly a differentiation is discovered. Yeah. Oh my goodness, look at us. Oh no.
Yeah.
What is this? It's very traumatic. It's a traumatic experience, not just getting physically kicked out of the garden, but having that pure, almost like a lack of self-image, because you are so totally engrossed with the personhood of God visiting with you in the garden every day that you didn't even realize that you were sort of this separate, independent, scrawny, weird-looking creature.
Yeah.
And as a result of sin, we are for the first time have to grapple with self outside of union with God.
Yeah.
And it is horrifying, and more than anything, it is shameful.
Yes.
And so that shame being sort of a first experience with self from the beginning of history.
Yeah.
Chris, makes it a very difficult thing. A shame almost being the good and natural reaction.
Yeah.
To realizing, your sort of inherent separation from where you want to be, which is, as close to God as possible.
Yes.
And that comes physically, but more than anything, the shame of realizing that who you are, the way you act, the way you feel, the way you interact, the way you are presented or received, suddenly all of these things are laid bare, and shame is the very first emotion in history felt at the confrontation with self-image. So I think we can all give ourselves a little bit of a break, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, yes, I did. I did say at first I was thinking, oh, where is this going? But as I was thinking about, I mean, you did a excellent job of
Thank you.
rebounding there. If
Thank
anybody
you.
was,
Yes,
going to
yes.
accuse us of heresy, you fixed it. But I
Gotcha.
mean, I immediately went not from the garden state, but to the eternal state, which I think it would be a lot easier for people to kind of hear what you were saying and agree with that in eternity. Yes, there will be such a close union with God that, as the listeners have, if they've heard the whole catalog, have heard me explain that I think that what Christ was doing on the cross was actually drawing us into Himself to be a part of Him, who is a part of the Godhead. So there is and again, I'm treading dangerously close here, but there is a part that we are intimately connected and brought into union and fellowship with God. And that is, when you think about it in terms of redemption, all redemption is the reversal of the fall. So
Right.
it's undoing the thing that was already there in the garden. So yes, there was a union and a fellowship with God, as you were explaining, where there was almost a oneness, and where you couldn't, maybe distinguish between the two in a certain sense, that we are sharing in being God's image bearers, if you will, almost like a mirror sort of reflection of Him, almost like
Yeah.
He looks at us and sees Himself.
Makes us right.
Right. And then you did a perfect job attaching the fall to that, and how, as a result of that, now that separation has been removed, and the immediate response is to look at ourselves, who are now not in union with God. We're not tethered to God anymore. And when we see ourselves apart from Him, the immediate response is shame. And that is, I think, kind of at the heart of this whole discussion of self-image, that we're seeing ourselves apart from God. And when we see ourselves apart from God, we're going to feel shame. We're going to feel like we don't measure up, because we don't. And whoever's terms that's by, the answer is still true. We don't measure up. We're not good enough. We do have imperfections. We look ugly. We don't feel comfortable in our own skin. All of those different things, because we're looking at ourselves not in union with Christ, not in union with God. So that really brought it all around.
Good. The page continues.
We didn't even get to the full. I didn't think we really answered the question of what the image of God actually is, though. Like in the whole Imago Dei discussion. I just want to. I'll just say it like this. There's people talk about creativity. But the difficulty is, you see creativity in the animal world, and animals aren't said to be created in the image of God. You can talk about rationality, but we see that in animals too. You can even talk about, a social sort of element, and interpersonal sort of, but you see that in the animal world as well. People will bring up a moral sort of quality, but we would say that even angels and Satan himself have a particular morality to them, even if Satan's morality always drags him, to the other side, and angels aren't said to be made in the image of God. And I think probably one of the best descriptors that I've heard is that there is this coming back into union again with God, and that is partnering with God and what He's doing. A lot of that has to be kind of ruling and reigning with Him. And then the other part of it is kind of like being His ambassadors. So like He's on a mission to save the world. He's on a mission to bring all of humanity back into union with Him. And He has given mankind the distinct calling and function in the earth to be His representatives and to kind of carry on the mission. And this all kind of ties into, you can go back to the commands and those sorts of things. And when He's talking about not, making idols, not making any images, of even God Himself, it's, forbidden in the Old Testament. And that is because we are already that image. He says, don't make any images of me. Don't try to make me into an image, because you are already that image. And in you being that image, you are also supposed to be carrying out the same mission. And that mission we see, first in Abraham, and then through the entire Jewish nation, and then into the church age after that, which is we are supposed to be partnering with God in being a witness to the world of who God is and drawing all men unto him. So that's just a real quick, we have a lot more to get to, but that image of God conversation went somewhere I didn't expect, but it was beautiful and wonderful. I loved it.
Good.
I just kind of wanted to, in case anybody was like, so what is I think that it has to do more with function.
God has two
in the
arms
earth.
and two legs and a head, just like us, and great hair.
White, yes, white, beautiful hair.
White
that
and a
is what
big
the Bible
beard,
tells us. Yeah,
big beard. Okay. Would you like to
yes, you
hear
can.
more about
Yes, we can move
self-image
on.
from
Yes,
the Teen
yes,
Study
yes.
Bible?
I'm sorry.
Okay. How can you build? Well, let's see. Should we do this? No. Yeah, let's do this one. How can you build a positive self-image? How can you build it? I think this is an interesting sort of call to action here. Remember, God made you the way you are, and God doesn't make junk. Don't spend time concentrating on what you think are your bad points. Work on your good ones. Build on your strengths and stop focusing on your weaknesses. Most important, make good decisions. That's good advice right there. If you make good decisions, trust me, kids, you will feel better about yourself. Stick to what you know is right, and you'll have a great reason to feel good about yourself. Took quite a sort of moralistic tone here, didn't it?
Yes, it did. It very much did. I don't. This would be a place where I would probably start to become a little bit critical with some of the content here, but not being our primary objective.
Let's take a quick walk through it. Let's take a little stroll, shall we?
Yeah.
How can you build a positive self-image? You know what? Maybe it's because of the 30 years of the self-help industry constantly trying to give me advice on how to, I don't know, build a positive self, better myself in some way. It's got an interesting sort of works-based sort of salvation.
Yeah.
Salvation in this case just being sort of an allegorical reference to,
feeling good about yourself. Winning.
Feeling good about yourself. Yes. Very well put. Yeah. So, okay. I get it. How can we build a positive? Let's let that slide. Remember, God made you the way you are, and God doesn't make junk. Don't spend time. God doesn't make junk. Okay, so God doesn't make junk. We can agree on that.
God making you the way you are, though, I don't. They would be, I guess, referring to it strictly in the physical and material, which you can't argue with that. I mean, God, how he chose, however, whichever sperm was going to make it to the egg, and however involved he is in that whole process, we agree that in accordance with Psalm 139, he constructed your body. Yes, however he did so. But that is one of the arguments, that come along with kind of the homosexual and gender, confused conversations these days is, well, God made me this way. And
I think I'm going to steer away from that for a second because I just don't want to get into the conversation.
Yeah, it's a big one.
But it's a bigger conversation. But let's just say someone is filled with a persistent and overwhelming draw to homicide.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say this.
A serial killer.
So this is the way one is at the moment. Again, we'll get kind of lost in the temporal variables that could be here. But let's just say it's a constant urge to commit a crime. That is the way you are, could be argued at any moment. And did God make you that way? And if God made you a homicidal maniac, I just don't even know if it's worth finishing that sentence, because I'm not sure. It just seems like you
probably should
like
abandon it.
A little bit simplified there. Yeah, remember God made you the way you are. I think they would have been great to end that sentence a little bit earlier. Remember God made you. and God doesn't make junk.
Yeah,
there we
that's,
go. I'll just
or
take
at
the
least
red pen.
specifically, I guess it's on a self-image page, so maybe they're thinking that that's all anyone's going to be thinking about is their looks.
The physical
attributes, and if you go to physical appearance, then I will agree. But I just had to, to do your due diligence, just insert a little footnote there and say that yes, we will give it to your physical appearance, but nothing else. You can't fault God for your sinful desires. So yeah.
Right. Murder. Don't spend time concentrating on what you think are your bad points. Work on your good ones. I'm not sure if that's very good advice, Chris. I think we should spend time kind of concentrating on our bad points and seeing what good choices we can make to improve those things. Again, millennials sort of being the infamous proto participation trophy generation. And it's interesting to kind of see this sneaking into the Teen Study Bible.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's almost like a fledgling
version of it here. Yes.
Fledgling participation trophy / almost like a grooming for a lifetime of predatory
careful
advertisements from the self-help industry. I'm just saying. I think Zondervan was playing a long-term game here.
Oh, boy.
They're like, we're going to get these kids used to sort of thinking that they're perfect just the way they are, and they don't need to change, and we will continue to sell them book after book after book, telling them that exact same thing, or helping them unlearn this idea, whichever way the plan was sort of laid out. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think we should focus on. Look, I'm all for working on our good points, building on our strengths. Perhaps obsessing about our weaknesses is not as helpful, but certainly we can exercise our weak parts and make them stronger.
Yeah. Well, in
fact, I think that would actually create a robust strategy as a teen grows into an adult, a robust set of habits to building positive self-image, knowing that you can strengthen your weaknesses with a little bit of hard work and willpower or whatever.
Yeah. So again, if you take this strictly, I'll try to give them the benefit of the doubt, but if you're taking it strictly in terms of your physical appearance, and of course I don't know that weak would be the way to, I mean, that is the way that Leah is described in the whole story with Jacob, that she had weak eyes. So maybe there's a reference there. I think it means she was ugly. That she didn't have beautiful eyes, but of course her sister Rachel was apparently very beautiful, and that's the one that Jacob wanted to marry in that whole thing. But it said she had weak eyes, but weak, not like the Psalms. What is it? Psalms 131 woman.
Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31 woman.
Yes.
Who has strong arms.
Strong arms.
Strong arms. Love a biblical woman with strong arms.
Yes. But yeah, I would say that when you're talking about, perhaps a person's traits and attributes and kind of, certainly their moral character, looking at your weaknesses is strongly encouraged by the Bible. To repent. I mean, to look at. It
seems like an unbiblical piece of advice.
Yeah,
and ignore all the things that are bad about you. Just focus on how awesome you are.
I just saw a thing though on Facebook or something the other day, scrolling along, and it said something like, "You've been telling yourself you can't do it for all these years and it's gotten you nowhere. Maybe try, telling yourself you can," something like that. And there is something to the, setting your mind on the right things. And I would say that the truth that could be gleaned from this little section right here would be, encourage yourself with the truth of what God says about you. Now, if you're talking about a person's physical appearance, I don't really know, because if that's another one of those things too, like I said, like struggling with my weight for a long time, that was something that if I just didn't think about it and just was like, oh, well, it's just the way that it is, I
Right.
took control of that. And I said, no, I'm going to watch what I eat. I'm going to exercise regularly. I'm going to make sure that I, get into the shape that I want to be in, to where it's actually a stewardship of my body. It says something about, my ability to, have self-control and all different kinds of things. It's important for many other reasons than I want to be able to take my shirt off at the beach and not feel like a slob. But that came from looking at a deficiency and then doing something about it. Now, if it has to do with the fact you don't like, whatever, the shape of your eyes, nose, lips, or something like that, well, I don't really know what to tell you there. I would certainly avoid, sending anybody in for any kind of, I guess, weird cosmetic surgeries and things like that. And I would say that God, did know exactly what he was doing in creating every person as he created them. And kind of going back to where this whole conversation started, maybe it's just not in the cards for you to be a knockout supermodel, and who is to say that is
not the American promise to my generation, Christopher.
Yeah.
I was told we all can be supermodels and pop stars.
Yeah. Well, you can't. I guess with enough money, anybody can have their face look any way that they want to.
Say, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be so quick to cast aspersions on what are they called? What is the good words for plastic surgery?
I don't.
Cosmetic surgery. That's what it was. Cosmetic, whatever, alterations, healthcare.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly not. I wouldn't. I mean, you do whatever you want to.
I think it would take I think that's an interesting conversation to have for the future. Certainly, people have their own personal, feelings about cosmetic surgery, but it would be interesting to really dig in on a deep sort of theological basis besides the sort of, God made you the way you are, don't mess with it type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, no, we are all supposed to be supermodels and pop stars. That's what we were told. That's what my participation trophy said right on it. But it's interesting that you do keep bringing it back to the looks, because of course we're reading the Teen Study Bible, and the last text on this page reads like this: "Still worried about your looks?"
This is my favorite part.
Are you still worried? Have you read this entire page and you're not absolutely absolved from the shame and horror, realizing that you have a self and you must deal with its separation from the oceanic oneness of unity with the Creator? Are you still worried about your looks after all this? Well, it says this: remember, they're temporary. They'll change. Quote, "So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." 2 Corinthians 4:18.
Yeah.
So just a last little, if you didn't get the point beforehand, folks, we'll just give it to you there at the end. Just stop worrying about how you look, teens.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of read that
they
more
really
like
just sort of put their foot down there at the end.
Well, I mean, what else can you say, I mean,
like, stop it. Just stop it, okay?
There's nothing you can do about it. But the bit where it said it's temporary and they'll change, I feel like that was just like some people are just ugly. I mean, I don't know
someday, some people are just ugly.
That's kind of how I read it for the first time I read it.
Don't worry, some people are just ugly, and if that's you, you'll die someday and it'll all be over and you'll be in heaven. is kind of a weird place to end.
That's how I read it, but I don't know if that's what they meant.
How else could you read it? That is absolutely the only way it could be read. Don't worry. If you're ugly, you'll die, and then none of this will matter. It's kind of a weird place to land this plane there, Zondervan.
Oh, man. We're laughing and having fun, but I'm thinking about if anybody actually is out there listening.
Any ugly people?
Yeah, and truly struggling with
You're beautiful. No, you're right. You're right.
Because I don't know, people, it's never been a thing. Like, I don't think I'm, super handsome or anything, but I've also never been like, oh, I'm ugly. Like, I've never had that thought before.
And life experience does go, and this is really the sad part, is that our self-image is built by others so much. I didn't get too deep into some more of the philosophical aspects of it, but there are some philosophical conversations that really build the self around a witness, much like the double slit experiment. If anybody is a quantum physics nerd, that the act of observing something changes it or brings it into reality where it may not have existed before. The act of an observer or a witness creates the reality. Now, of course, again, treading towards some loosey-goosey stuff here. Again, not trying to lay down orthodoxy, just discussing different philosophical conversations. And one of them is that the self is constructed by the witness of others, and other people have a bigger role in how we see ourselves than we do. And if you're, you can simplify it down so far to simply say, looks really are on a continuum of comparison. If someone thinks that they are not good looking, it is literally only in comparison to someone else who you think is good looking, or even more, to get this, to kind of snag some of Dr. Peter Rollins's material here. The material that I heard from him, which is, our desire is to be desired, or is the desire of another. And we base our sort of standards for physical looks based on how desirable it would be to someone else, not necessarily ourself.
Yeah.
So, whatever a self may be. And so I say all this to say, in such a eloquently rambly way, of course, staccatoed with the fritzing out of my brain and looking up vocabulary words, to circle back to, if someone does consider themselves to not be good looking or whatever, and that is something that bothers them, it's one thing to just not be bothered by it. I know plenty of people who will admit, I don't know, I'm not the best looking guy, but it doesn't really bother me. But if it is something that does bother you, consider why it bothers you. It's because you quite possibly were told that as a young person, which is horrible. Whether by bullies or by parents or by, of course, just society, as it sort of sets the standard for what good looking is. That is not a fun way to live. It is not a healthy way to grow up. And unfortunately, it happens to us without our own consent. So it really is a bit of a luck of the draw if you are sort of given a life that includes people who do this horrible thing to you, which is, make you think that you are somehow less valuable because of your looks.
Yeah.
And I think
It's
I kind of go...
an interesting thing to pride yourself on, given that you had nothing to do with it whatsoever.
Right.
People who feel great about themselves because they might be physically attractive or beautiful or something like that. It's like, and what did you have to do with any of that at all?
And that's fine. If there are good-looking people listening to this show, and I know there are, it's totally fine to feel good about that.
Gosh.
What's not okay is the place that people have to live, where they see what others desire. They desire to have the desire of the other people, but they cannot get it because they do not look a certain way.
Yeah.
And that is just really, just to sort of express some empathy to that, it makes sense. It makes sense that somebody could get caught up in that. And I will say this, though. In my experience, the people who are not necessarily on the cover of the magazines are the funniest people I know. And that's way more important to me.
Well, and it's not even just you could list all different kinds of attributes. And again, that's not you don't want to err on the wrong side and say if you're good looking you're probably shallow or anything like that. But there sometimes people have, like I said, when I was younger, there was a certain way I had to start connecting with people because any people just look at me like, oh, you're just a little meatball. People used to call me meatball.
That's cute. Can I call you meatball? Is that going to trigger you? Is that going to be bad?
Dr. Meatball.
Dr. Meatball. Oh my gosh. Dr. Meatball is so good. Nobody can call Chris that, just me.
That's what my son looks like right now, a little meatball. But
I love him.
But
sorry.
Go ahead. I don't know where I'm going with it.
Yeah, okay. So, I'll take a moment to be vulnerable, and hopefully that this will be helpful to somebody out there. Now, we just had our Mother's Day episode. We had our mothers on the line. My mother now listens to this show regularly, and
hello, Mama Baz.
Hello, Mama Basil. And I don't know if I've talked to her about this, which I probably should before she hears it here. And it's not a big deal. I'm setting it up and it's sort of a big deal, but it's not. But I will say, in my older age, as I look back on pictures of myself, when I thought that I was just sort of I thought I was a Dr. Meatball. And I look back, and that is just an entirely ludicrous thing for me to have thought. And I thought to myself, how in the world did I think this? And trying to give myself some breaks here. But there, were totally benign, loving influences in my life. People who themselves are affected by society and how they are told they should be. And my parents were no strangers to, the sort of classic 90s and early aughts diet culture, which nowadays there's much more visibility on, and there's much more studies, actual scientific studies and sociological studies on the harmful effects of diet culture. So it's kind of a different world now. But when I was a kid, my parents were very diligent diet culture participants, and they would, this is not taking them by surprise. And I realized that I think that I just learned that is just a normal thing to do. Whether or not my body is a shape that needs to be on a diet or not, I think I just kind of learned from watching my parents that you're just on a diet. You're just always on a diet. That's just what you do. And I think that informed a lot of my sort of, I don't know about self-image, but it informed a lot of just how I should live my life and think about my own body. And thankfully, I have grown out of that. And thankfully, I don't know what collection of circumstances led to this, but I was able to see that was probably the majority of where my mindset had come from. And I don't think that this is unique to my parents. I think it is probably something almost every human being my age could relate with, because it's a very profitable industry, the diet industry. And it's very good at convincing people that they need to be doing something different in order to reach a goal that is set for them by someone else. Mainly someone else who will profit from their search and journey to make it to that point. And so I think that's something to be mindful of, perhaps with parents, but I think it also works with peers, that, are you operating in such a way? Remember, the people, possibly one theory of self would say that, much of our desires come from what other people desire. And if other people desire me to be on a diet or whatever, or they desire to be on a diet, then that is something that I desire. And I think if we all are a little bit more mindful of the example that we're setting for our peers or our family, it might go a long way to cutting that process a little bit short, instead of taking 20 years for someone to realize this, like it did me. So I don't know. That's just something that I realized in my life, and I think about that often, actually.
Yeah.
How I kind of got stuck in that habit for so long, and it was simply because that's just kind of the examples that I had around me.
Yeah, well, and those are good examples. You should be a good steward of your body. It is the container for your soul in this life, and you need to take care of it. It obviously, makes your life easier as you get older, to be healthy.
Feels good, man. I've been working out, been lifting, stronger than ever.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling. It feels good to be strong. I'll just say that
out
there.
It does. Yeah. And it also, as I was talking about a little bit earlier, demonstrates that you have a certain amount of self-control, that you don't just give yourself over to, any of your basest sort of desires. And that is one of those things, when we were talking kind of just jokingly, I guess, kind of, or passingly rather, about the body kind of sensitivity movement or whatever, healthy at any size or however they call it. There is a way in which, yes, I can agree with that and say that that's true, and people are all different shapes and sizes in the world, but there also is a sense in which you have to, as Paul talks about, master your own body, and you have to make good, healthy decisions for your body, and for your future, and for to stay healthy, primarily in order to be a positive testimony to the world, and somebody who is able to carry on a lifelong mission of doing the Lord's work with him. So there's, all of that, but I think that being healthy is something that certainly can become an idol for people. I would say at a certain time in my life, I might have considered that to be an idol. I was working out, way more than I was spending any time with the Lord or anything like that. And physically, I was in great shape, and spiritually, I was in very poor shape.
Yes.
So
you don't want to worship at the Iron Temple.
Yeah.
The Church of Gains.
Church of Gains.
You go to the Church of Gains, bro.
So you just gotta have a balance. Yeah, you don't have, not everybody has to be, in whatever perfect shape, the world says that you should be in. But you also, you should give consideration, to your fitness and those sorts of things. And I think that it actually is
and give yourself
an act
a break.
Of worship. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That is all very important. It feels like it is so easy to go around in circles with this self-image topic.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps this is why it has been such a scandalous and debated topic for thousands of years in the sort of philosophical realm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and give yourself a break, everybody. Remember, when the first human beings discovered that they had a self, they too were ashamed
They hated it.
And they didn't like it at all. I think it's just generally a very traumatic experience being a self, having a self, I don't know, whatever, just acting a self, whatever whatever it comes from.
Uh-huh.
It's an incredibly hard situation to be in, and I'm not 100% sure if this was the original plan, but this is where we find ourselves now. So just give yourself a break, okay? All right? All right? Can we just all agree?
Becky.
That
was just a 90s teenager
Brittany.
Name I could think of.
Blaze. That was a one, right?
Blake, I was thinking
Blake.
when you started, but
Keith.
Blake.
Blake.
Dylan.
Yeah.
Dylan was a big one, wasn't it?
Honestly, we could just name the names of our peers, Chris, because we are
those
who
people.
Grew up in the 90s. Rachel. Now I'm just naming ex-girlfriends. I'm sorry. What was I gonna say?
Lord, I don't know. We're landing the plane, I think.
We're landing the plane. We're trying so desperately to land the plane here. But then I just started naming names. What were we talking about? Oh, give each other a break. Give yourself a break. And in the, whether or not it is some sort of objective truth, but when people see you giving yourself a break about your self-image, then they'll give themselves a break as well.
Amen.
So let's do that. Let's all do that. And remember, whatever it means, you're created in the image of God. And that's something, okay? And if you're like me and you really want to test the waters, jump into the deep end, go ahead. Ask God what he really thinks about you. How
Amen.
Tiny, how weak, but how much he loves you at the same time.
You're fearfully and wonderfully made.
Indeed. And that is the Teen Study Bible Study. And I have some big news for you, Chris.
Oh, please.
Today, I went out to the post office there and picked up my new old copy of the Extreme Teen Bible.
Uh-oh.
That's right.
Leveling up.
We're leveling up. We've got the Teen Study Bible, and we've got the Extreme Teen Bible. Now, this, I did not know. This is the New King James version. This is the one that I did have. And this was, this particular copy seems to have been published not by Zondervan, but by Nelson Bibles. Are you familiar with this? Is this a subsidiary of Zondervan?
No idea. No idea.
We'll have to look into that. But yes, the new and upgraded 1998 version, I believe, of the Extreme Teen Bible. So we might be doing some hopping around. Ooh, this one was copyright 1999 by Thomas Nelson. Yeah, okay. And I'm looking through this, and man, did they pack this sucker with even more material. It's almost too much material. So I'm not sure exactly how it will look exploring this Bible. I think we'll stick with the Teen Bible for now, but just know in the future we do have the upgraded version, and it just feels good to have. What was the name of the previous owner of your Teen Study Bible?
It was Lindsay Forgeron.
So you have not made contact with Lindsay yet.
I have messaged every Lindsay Forgeron on Facebook, and no one has responded. So,
okay. Well, I too have a Bible that was previously owned by someone, and on the inside of the cover, the words are written in Sharpie. Xander's Bible, no touchy.
No, Xander?
Xander's Bible, no touchy.
Way.
Xander. So no last name, no nothing. I'm just looking at it, and it looks like the handwriting of a teen. Xander's Bible, no touchy.
No touchy.
So Xander, I've got your Bible, and Xander, I touchy.
Gosh.
I touchy your Bible, and thank you very much. I don't know why Xander was so protective of this Bible.
I was wondering that too, but
there's no notes. I'm not seeing any notes, no scribbles. Honestly, Xander,
maybe
it looks
he
like
didn't
you could have.
touch it.
Looks like Xander no touchy this Bible. Honestly, so there you go. We've got that in my possession now.
Wow, very nice. I can't wait to jump in.
It's a lot.
I was thinking as we're landing the plane and talking about self-image that maybe someone can help us with our self-image. We put a little request out a while ago, but maybe we can start like soliciting it even more and more. If there's anybody out there who can help us with our social media
manager,
because
we need a Ravel social media manager.
I tried for a few months, and it's just not.
Yeah.
I don't have the time whatsoever.
It's not yours,
and it's not my forte either.
It's not your thing, but it's okay. You did a wonderful job.
What about you? Why don't you?
It is also not my thing. So we will.
Okay. Well, there you go.
We
need
get
help.
A social media manager. I might be able to reach out to perhaps some producers of other shows and see if they're willing to participate.
I think there is one in our midst who is not using their time, treasure, talents.
So this is an earnest request.
It is.
This is an earnest request to listeners of Ravel. Somebody out there. Here's the thing. You don't need to be a professional social media person.
God, neither of us are. So
literally anything is better than what we're doing now.
Right.
So if you simply feel drawn to participate in an international ministry like Ravel Podcast, be a part of what God is doing here and stuff like that, send us an email, contact@ravelpodcast.com.
Yeah.
Contact.
Yeah, it would be a huge blessing to us. I have people asking, all the time about the social media presence, and then especially even when we have guests on, I just feel really like we're slighting them, not by trying to, get the word out. Extra
that's
for
kind of
them.
the tough part. They see that we don't post things about their episode and stuff, and it's just not good.
Yeah.
And it's simple because there's software now that we can get a subscription to that somebody could manage all of the social media in one place.
Oh my
Schedule
goodness.
it out. It's like a whole thing, folks. And we need it so badly. We need your help so badly.
Please.
This is not a casual call out. This is a cry for help. So will anybody answer? There you go. Send an email to contact@ravelpodcast.com.
All right.
And there you go. Along with that, leave us some ratings and reviews. It really helps us out. We'll be doing more episodes of Ravel, including one coming out next week. So make sure to catch that. And Chris, do you have any last words?
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.
You've got mail.